search is over. Not paused, not suspended, not placed on hold pending new funding or new technology or a new theory about where to look. Over. After 12 years, after 4 separate search operations, after 240,000 square kilometers of ocean floor mapped in more detail than the surface of the moon, after the most expensive aviation search in the history of human flight, the answer is still nothing. No plane, no black box, no wreckage field, no grave for 239 people. The search is over, and the ocean gave back almost nothing. And tonight, you are going to understand exactly why that is one of the most disturbing sentences in the history of modern aviation. Because here is what you need to understand before we go any further. Missing planes get found. They always get found. Air France 447 went down in the South Atlantic in 2009, vanished into water. The first debris was located within 5 days. The main wreckage field was found in less than 2 years. The black boxes were recovered. The families got answers. They got a cause. They got a grave in the ocean they could point to and say, there, that is where it ended. MH370. O has denied 239 families that single sentence for 12 years. And now, with Ocean Infinity's second search officially concluded after sweeping 140,000 square kilometers of the southern Indian Ocean with autonomous underwater vehicles that can see a dinner plate on the seafloor from 6,000 meters up, they are still denied it. The ocean is still keeping whatever secret it is keeping. And tonight, we are going to follow that secret to the edge of what anyone can know. I need you to plant 3 images in your mind right now, because I am going to return to all 3 of them before this story is over. First image, the southern Indian Ocean at night. Not a romantic image, not a postcard. The real thing. Black water, not blue, swells the height of a 4-story building. The nearest landmass hundreds of kilometers away. A place so remote that during the 2014 search, ships spent weeks sailing just to reach the search zone. An ocean so vast and so deep that the searchers used to say they were looking for a needle in a haystack, which was itself inside another bigger haystack, which was itself sitting somewhere on the floor of the biggest room on Earth. That is image 1. Second image, the last message ever received from MH370, transmitted from the cockpit at 1:19 a.m. on the 8th of March 2014. Good night, Malaysian 370. Calm, routine. A handoff from Malaysian airspace to Vietnamese air traffic control. The kind of sign-off that happens hundreds of times every night, across every corner of the sky. Standard, unremarkable. The last human words spoken from that cockpit that anyone would ever hear. Third image, a beach on Reunion Island, July 2015. A piece of aircraft wing, grey and streaked with barnacles, half buried in sand. A flaperon from a Boeing 777. Real, confirmed. The first physical proof that MH370 had not simply evaporated, that it had met the ocean and broken into pieces, but something of it existed to be found. I will come back to all 3 of these images, and when I do, each one will mean something darker than it means right now. Malaysia Airlines, Flight 370, departed Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 12:41 a.m. on the 8th of March 2014. It was a red-eye, a Boeing 777-200 ER, one of the most reliable wide-body aircraft ever manufactured, with a safety record that aviation engineers used as a benchmark. 239 people on board, 227 passengers, 12 crew. Destination: Beijing, Capital International Airport. A flight time of roughly 5 hours and 40 minutes. Routine, completely routine. The kind of flight that MH370's captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, had flown more than 18,000 hours of in his career. The kind of flight where the biggest concern is whether the meal service runs on time. The plane lifted off. It climbed to cruising altitude. It flew northeast across the Gulf of Thailand. At 1:07 a.m., the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, the ACARS, sent its last automated transmission, a routine data packet, normal. At 1:19 a.m., the co-pilot, Farik Abdul Hamid, radioed air traffic control and said those 7 words: "Good night, Malaysian 370. And then, within the next 2 minutes, something happened on that aircraft that has not been explained to any certifiable standard in 12 years of trying. The transponder stopped transmitting. The AGCARS went silent. The plane disappeared from civilian radar. It became a ghost, flying through the dark over water, invisible to every instrument that was designed to see it. Here is the first fracture in the official story, and I need you to feel its full weight. The transponder and the ACARS do not simply stop. They are not the same system. They do not share a single point of failure, and they cannot both be knocked out simultaneously by a mechanical malfunction without also triggering a cascade of other failures that would have been audible and visible inside the cockpit. For both of them to go silent at the same time, a specific sequence of actions had to be performed by human hands. Not a lightning strike, not a pressurization failure, not a bird impact. Human hands. Someone on that aircraft, in the minutes immediately following the words, "Good night, Malaysian 370, reached for those systems and turned them off. That is the ground beneath everything that follows. That is the bedrock of the mystery. And that single fact is the reason why 12 years of searching the ocean has not produced an answer. Because what you do with that fact determines where you look. And if you look in the wrong place, you find nothing, which is exactly what happened. Malaysian military radar tracked the aircraft after it disappeared from civilian radar. That is important. It did not fall from the sky. At 1:19 a.m., it kept flying. But instead of continuing northeast toward Vietnam and then China, it turned. A sharp, deliberate, programmed turn to the left, banking back across the Malay Peninsula, flying southwest over the Strait of Malacca, then turning again, heading northwest. Someone had changed the flight plan. Someone had pointed that aircraft in a completely different direction, and that aircraft had followed. The military radar lost it over the Andaman Sea. After that, nothing. No radar contact, no radio, no signal of any kind. Just a plane-shaped hole in the sky over one of the most isolated stretches of ocean on Earth, carrying 239 people and whatever secret had been enacted in the cockpit at 1:19 a.m. And then the satellite found it. Not in real time, not immediately. In the days after the disappearance, analysts at Inmarsat, the British satellite communications company, were trawling through data logs looking for any trace of the aircraft. What they found was not a GPS signal. It was not a tracking ping. It was something far stranger and far more technically fragile. A series of automated handshakes between the aircraft's satellite communication unit and an Inmarsat satellite sitting in geostationary orbit, 35,786 kilometers above the equator. These handshakes are not designed to carry navigational data. They are the satellite equivalent of a phone checking whether it still has a connection. They carry almost no information. But the Inmarsat engineers, working in an analytical domain that had never been applied to aviation investigation before, realized that two tiny properties of those handshakes could be used to calculate something. The burst timing offset, or BTO, could indicate the distance from the satellite to the aircraft. The burst frequency offset, or BFO, could indicate the relative velocity between the satellite and the aircraft. Using these two measurements, taken from 7 handshakes logged over several hours, they constructed an arc, a curved line across the southern Indian Ocean, where, according to the physics of those signals, the aircraft must have been when it sent its last ping at 8:19 a.m., approximately 7 hours after takeoff. That arc became the foundation of every search that followed. That arc is why Ocean Infinity spent 4 years and 2 search campaigns in the southern Indian Ocean. And that arc has now been searched in enormous, exhaustive detail and found to contain nothing, which means we have arrived at the question that the official investigation has never been comfortable answering directly. If the plane is not where the data says it should be, what does that mean? There are only 2 logical possibilities. The first, the data is right, and the search has simply not yet covered the correct portion of the arc. The second, the data is wrong. Not fabricated, not manipulated, but wrong. In the way that applying an entirely new analytical method to satellite signals that were never designed to carry navigational information is always going to carry a margin of error. And that margin of error, stretched across thousands of kilometers of ocean, could mean the plane is somewhere completely different to where everyone has been looking. Both possibilities are genuinely disturbing. The first means the plane is sitting in unmapped ocean, waiting to be found, silent and dark, 239 people inside the hull, and no one is coming for them anymore because the search is over. The second means the entire 12-year investigation was built on a foundation that contained a crack, and the crack was never wide enough to see until you drained the area it was supposed to point to and found nothing there. We are still at rung 1 of this story, and I need you to feel how much darker the rungs above it are going to get. Because we have not yet talked about what the debris told us. We have not yet talked about what the independent drift analysis found when they ran the wreckage backwards through the ocean currents. We have not yet talked about what was on Zahari's home flight simulator. And we have not yet talked about what Ocean Infinity's 2024 to 2025 search actually covered, and what portion of the arc remains unmapped, and what that portion's silence might mean. But first, I want to return to the satellite data, because this is the fracture point of the entire investigation, and I am not done pulling on it. The Inmarsat analysis was extraordinary, genuinely brilliant engineering under extreme pressure, but it was also unprecedented. No aviation accident had ever been reconstructed from BTO and BFO data before. The methodology had never been validated against a known crash. The margin of error in the BFO data, which is the component that told investigators the aircraft was heading south rather than north, has been a subject of quiet persistent dispute among independent analysts since 2014. The BFO measurement is sensitive to the aircraft's vertical speed, its lateral velocity, and the temperature of the satellite's onboard oscillator, which drifts. Small errors in any of these inputs produce large errors in the output. The independent analysts at the Duncan Steel Group, at the Victor Ianello Network, at the ATSB's own external review panels, have all noted that the error bars on the final arc position are not small. They are not a few kilometers. They are potentially hundreds of kilometers, and hundreds of kilometers of error in the southern Indian Ocean is the difference between the search zone that has been exhausted and a zone that has never been touched. And we still have not answered the only question that matters, because what the debris told the drift modelers when they ran their calculations backwards through the currents is about to make the satellite data question look like the easy part of this story. The flaperon found on Reunion Island in July 2015 was the first confirmed piece of MH370 wreckage, real, Boeing 777, matched to MH370's maintenance records. It had been in the water for approximately 16 months before it washed ashore, which is consistent with a March 2014 crash. In the years that followed, more pieces came. A horizontal stabilizer fragment on a sandbar in Mozambique, confirmed 777. A flap fairing washed up in Tanzania. Fragments found in Madagascar, in South Africa, on the island of Rodriguez. Each piece real. Each piece consistent with MH370. Each piece having drifted for months or years through the currents of the southern Indian Ocean and eventually deposited itself on the coastlines of eastern Africa and the islands of the southwest Indian Ocean. The drift analysts took these arrival locations, these arrival times, and they fed them into oceanographic models. They ran the currents backwards. They asked, if this piece of debris landed here on this date, where in the ocean did it enter the water? The answer they got was not a clean confirmation of the Inmarsat search zone. The answer pointed to a crash location that was north of the primary search zone, further north than the ATSB's confidence zone, north of the area where the deepest, most systematic searching has been done. Some analysts put the debris-consistent entry point hundreds of kilometers north of where Ocean Infinity has been looking. Not all analysts agree. The uncertainty in drift modeling over 16 months is enormous. But the disagreement between the satellite data analysis and the debris drift analysis has never been fully resolved. And that unresolved disagreement is sitting at the center of a search strategy that has now been officially terminated. The plane is not where the satellite said. The debris might be pointing somewhere the searchers didn't go, and the search is over. This is rung 2. The hole is bigger than it looked. The evidence is pointing in slightly different directions, and the gap between those directions, measured in square kilometers of unsearched ocean, is large enough to hide an entire aircraft, including the 2 black boxes that would answer every question this video is going to raise. I want to stop for a moment and let the weight of the timeline press against you properly, because 12 years is an abstraction until you map it onto a human life. The families who were sitting in that airport at 7 a.m. on the 8th of March, 2014, waiting for a plane that was not going to arrive, have now spent 12 years without an answer. Not 12 years of active searching and progress and narrowing fields. 12 years of official searches ending funding drying up, investigators moving on, the search zone shifting north, south, contracting, expanding, and coming back empty every time. 12 years of debris washing onto beaches and being rushed to laboratories and coming back confirmed and still not pointing to a grave. 12 years of press conferences where officials stand at podiums and use words like high confidence and most probable location and significant area coverage. And 12 years later, those words have produced nothing. The 239 families have been told multiple times that the search was entering its most promising phase. They have been told the technology was better than anything that came before. They have been told the searchers were confident, and now they are being told the search is over. And there is a particular cruelty in that sentence that you do not get to abstract away just because you are not the one sitting in it. The Malaysian government has said it remains open to resuming the search if credible new evidence emerges. Ocean Infinity has said it would consider a new search under a no-find, no-fee arrangement, which was the basis of both its 2018 and 2024 to 2025 campaigns. But credible new evidence, in this context, means new analysis of the existing satellite data or new debris finds that significantly constrain the entry point, or a technological breakthrough that makes searching the remaining arc economically feasible. None of those things are imminent, and the families who have spent 12 years navigating between hope and devastation in a rhythm that has no natural end are now being asked to absorb the words "search over" and find somewhere to put them. What does "search over" actually mean for aviation safety? Because MH370 is not only a tragedy, it is a failure of a system. A Boeing 777 carrying 239 people vanished from every tracking system and flew for 7 hours, and the world's aviation infrastructure had no way to see it. That failure produced reforms. The ICAO required real-time aircraft tracking to be implemented across global aviation by November 2023, meaning all commercial aircraft flying international routes must now transmit their position automatically every minute using satellite-based ADS-B systems. Those systems could not be silenced by turning off a transponder. In that specific sense, MH370 changed aviation. But the black boxes, which contain the definitive record of what happened in that cockpit and why, are still on the floor of an ocean somewhere. And without them, the investigation cannot be formally closed. It can only be abandoned. And abandonment is not closure. It is the choice to stop looking, which is not the same as finding nothing to find. The debris did not cooperate with the official story. That is the cleanest way to say it. And I want you to hold that sentence, because it is going to matter more and more as we go deeper. The pieces of MH370 that washed onto beaches across the Western Indian Ocean rim were real, confirmed, belonging to the aircraft. But when the oceanographers ran their drift models backwards, when they asked the currents to give back the origin point, the answer kept sliding north, not dramatically, not by thousands of kilometers, but persistently, stubbornly, by enough to matter, north of the primary search zone, north of the zone that has now been officially exhausted, toward a stretch of arc that has received less systematic coverage than the area where the searchers spent most of their effort. And that persistent northward drift of the debris evidence is not a fringe claim. it is not a conspiracy. It is a peer-reviewed oceanographic finding that has appeared in multiple independent analyses, and the official investigation has never produced a satisfying answer for why the debris and the satellite data are not pointing to the same place. The drift modelling was led by researchers including Charitha Patiarachi at the University of Western Australia and David Griffin at CSIRO, two of the most respected oceanographic institutions in the world. They built models using historical current data, surface drift buoys, and the confirmed arrival locations and arrival dates of debris items. They fed MH370 debris items into those models and ran them backwards through time. The flaperon from Reunion, backwards 16 months through the currents. Where did it enter the water? The stabilizer fragment from Mozambique, backwards through its drift path. What origin point is consistent? The results from multiple independent teams clustered, not identically, but the cluster was north of the primary search zone. Patiarachi's analysis suggested a crash site around 32 degrees south on the 7th arc. The primary ATSB search zone extended from approximately 33 to 39 degrees south. The gap between the debris-consistent location and the most intensively searched zone was not small. It was hundreds of kilometres, and the area around 32 degrees south, while partially covered by Ocean Infinity's campaigns, was not covered with the same density and confidence as the zones further south. That gap is still out there. It is still unsearched at the resolution required to definitively rule out the presence of wreckage, and the search is over. I want to introduce something here that the official search has consistently downplayed, because it is uncomfortable in ways that the investigation has never fully wanted to be. The debris that came ashore was not only notable for where it pointed geographically, it was notable for what it told investigators about the final moments of the flight, specifically the condition of the pieces. Aviation debris from a high-speed, near-vertical impact with the ocean looks different from aviation debris that enters the water at a lower speed and a shallower angle. High-speed impact shatters. It produces small fragments, heavily deformed, consistent with enormous kinetic forces. Lower speed entry produces larger pieces, less fragmented, consistent with a more controlled descent. The flaperon from Reunion Island was, by most assessments, in relatively good condition for a piece of aircraft that had been in the ocean for 16 months. The mechanisms that would produce a clean separation of a flaperon from a wing are not necessarily consistent with a catastrophic high-speed dive. Independent analyst Don Thompson, whose technical work on the debris has been widely cited, noted that several of the recovered pieces showed fracture patterns, more consistent with aerodynamic loading during flight than with a high-energy impact. What that means in plain language is that some of the physical evidence is more consistent with a controlled ditching or a slow final descent than with the aircraft entering the ocean at high speed following an uncontrolled dive, which matters enormously because the official trajectory model built from the satellite data assumes that the aircraft ran out of fuel and then entered a steep spiral descent. A steep spiral descent at several hundred knots produces a very different wreckage field and very different debris condition than a controlled descent. And the two scenarios place the wreckage in very different locations on the ocean floor. If the final descent was steep and fast, the wreckage field is compact and deep and sits close to the last satellite arc. If the final descent was shallow and controlled, the aircraft could have glided for significant distance after the engine stopped. Significant distance in a glide at altitude means potentially hundreds of kilometers, which means the wreckage could be hundreds of kilometers from the final arc position, which means every search that has been anchored to the arc could be looking in the wrong direction by an amount that makes all the searching almost meaningless. That is rung 3. Someone on that aircraft made deliberate choices. The systems did not fail. They were turned off. And the manner in which the plane entered the ocean may have been deliberate too, which means the question is no longer only where the plane went. The question is who was flying it when it got there and what they intended. Remember what I told you about the debris? We are about to find out why every piece of wreckage that washed ashore told a slightly different story than the one the official search was built on, and why those small differences, taken together, form a picture that the investigators have acknowledged and then quietly set to one side. Zaharie Ahmad Shah was 53 years old. He had been flying for Malaysia Airlines for more than 2 decades. He was, by every external measure, an experienced and competent pilot. He held a commercial pilot license. He had accumulated over 18,000 hours of flight time. He was respected by colleagues. He had a family. He had hobbies. He was known as an aviation enthusiast who maintained a sophisticated home flight simulator, which is not unusual among pilots who take their craft seriously. He was, in the language of official investigations, not a person of concern. And yet, the Royal Malaysian Police, in the course of their investigation, examined that home flight simulator. They extracted data from it. They found that in the weeks before the disappearance, someone had plotted a route on that simulator. The route went south into the southern Indian Ocean. The route ended near a location that, when compared against the Inmarsat 7th arc, sat within or near the search zone. The investigators acknowledged this. They did not explain it. They noted it and moved on. The official narrative has never integrated that simulator data into a coherent explanation of what happened. It sits in the investigation record like a wound that was closed too quickly, and beneath it, something is still moving. What does it mean that someone plotted that route? The Malaysian police said they could not determine who had plotted it or when. They said simulator files are volatile, that data can be partially overwritten, that the reconstruction was incomplete. They said they found no other evidence of intent. They did not name Zaharie as a suspect. They have never named anyone as a suspect. The investigation officially has never attributed the disappearance of MH370 to any individual or any cause. It has produced a safety report that identifies systemic failures in tracking and response, but does not say what happened in that cockpit and does not say who was responsible. 12 years later, that absence is not a gap in the evidence. It is a choice, because the evidence that exists points in a direction, and following that direction to its logical end requires saying something that aviation authorities and governments are structurally reluctant to say. The Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, the ACRs, was disabled first. The timing of its last transmission at 1:07 a.m. means it was shut down in the window between that transmission and the verbal sign-off at 1:19 a.m. The transponder was shut off at approximately 1:21 a.m. within 2 minutes of those last words from the cockpit. These are not simultaneous failures. They are sequential. They follow an order. The ACARS first, then the transponder, then the turn. Sequential, deliberate, methodical. Not the signature of a mechanical catastrophe, the signature of a plan. And the turn itself, a southwesterly course that used the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, a precise moment of handoff between two air traffic control zones, as cover. The aircraft disappeared from radar in the gap between two jurisdictions, neither of which was expecting the other to have it. Whether that timing was coincidental or chosen is a question the investigation has never answered, but the fact that it could have been chosen and that the outcome was exactly what choosing it would have produced is not something you can unsee once you see it. There are people who have spent years building the case that Zahari did this. They point to the simulator data. They point to the sequential system shutdowns. They point to reports, never fully substantiated in public, that he was experiencing personal difficulties in the period before the disappearance. They point to the route itself. Why the southern Indian Ocean specifically, if not because someone wanted the aircraft to be unfindable? The southern Indian Ocean is the most remote and least surveilled body of water on the planet. A plane entering it with no transponder, no ACARS, flying at night, routing away from shipping lanes and military radar coverage, would be as close to invisible as a large aircraft can get in the modern era. That invisibility is not an accident of geography. It requires knowledge of where the gaps in the surveillance network are. It requires knowing that the southern Indian Ocean is where things go to disappear. And the person on that aircraft most likely to have that knowledge, most likely to know where the gaps were and how to exploit them, was the captain. The families of the passengers have resisted this narrative. The families of the crew have resisted it more forcefully, and they are right to demand that the bar for attributing this to any individual must be higher than circumstantial pattern matching. No one has been charged. No one has been named. The investigation is not closed with a conclusion. It is closed without one. And the absence of a conclusion is not the same as innocence or guilt. It is simply the absence of enough evidence to cross the threshold that a formal finding requires. But the evidence that exists, when you lay it out on a table and stand back and look at it, describes something. It describes deliberate action. It describes knowledge and planning. It describes someone who knew how to make a large aircraft disappear and use that knowledge, whether that description fits Zahari or someone else on that aircraft, or involves some element of the story that has not yet been found, is the question. And the search being over does not close that question. It orphans it. It sends it out into the world with no institutional home, no ongoing investigation, no funding, no mechanism for resolution. The co-pilot, Fariq Abdul Hamid, was 27 years old. He was newly qualified on the 777. It was one of his first long-haul flights on the aircraft. He was, by all accounts, a diligent student of aviation with a clean record and a future that had just started. His family has consistently maintained that there is no possibility he was involved, and the investigation has found nothing that contradicts that position. Fariq is not in the frame by any credible analysis, which means if deliberate action by a crew member is the explanation, The direction of that analysis leads to one place, and the investigation will not go there. Not formally, not publicly, not without evidence that the ocean has so far declined to provide. The black boxes are the only witnesses, and the black boxes are somewhere in a body of water so vast and so dark that the most sophisticated underwater search technology ever deployed has now been unable to locate them across 2 separate campaigns. If there is a story the cockpit voice recorder is holding, it has been holding it for 12 years in the pressure dark, and it will keep holding it until someone finds the plane. And the search is over. I need to come back to something I planted earlier because it is time to detonate it. The image of the ocean at night, that first image I asked you to hold. I told you it was black, not blue. I told you the swells were 4 stories high. I want to add something to that image now. The southern Indian Ocean, in the primary search zone, sits between 3,000 and 6,000 meters deep. Some portions exceed 6,000 meters. At that depth, the pressure is approximately 600 atmospheres. No light reaches it. The temperature is just above freezing. The terrain on the floor is not flat sand. It is a complex of underwater ridges, seamounts, abyssal plains, and geological formations that create acoustic shadows, blind spots for sonar, places where an autonomous underwater vehicle mapping the floor with multi-beam echo sounders simply cannot see into the folds in the rock. The search teams have been careful and methodical and operating at the absolute edge of what the technology can do, and they have still missed portions. Not through negligence, through physics. The ocean floor in the southern Indian Ocean is not a simple surface. It is a landscape, and a landscape that complex, at those depths, in that area, still contains corners, and the search is over. Ocean Infinity's 2024 to 2025 campaign deployed a fleet of 8 autonomous underwater vehicles simultaneously, covering the search area at a density and speed that made the 2018 campaign look preliminary. The 2018 campaign had covered approximately 112,000 square kilometers. The 2024 to 2025 campaign targeted an additional zone focused on an area around 32 to 34 degrees south that had been flagged by independent analysts, specifically the work of researchers who had argued that the original ATSB search zone extended too far south, and that the northern portion of the arc had been under-searched relative to the confidence the debris drift analysis warranted. Ocean Infinity covered that area. They found, in 140,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, no aircraft, no engines, no black boxes, no debris field, no anomaly consistent with the presence of a large aircraft. Nothing. The question this produces is not academic. It is existential for the investigation, because those 140,000 square kilometers were the best evidenced remaining candidate area. They were the zone that the most credible independent analysis and the most defensible reading of the debris data said the plane should be in, and the plane is not there, which means either the analysis is wrong, or the plane is somewhere else, or there is something about the final moments of MH370 that has not been accounted for in any model, official or independent. And that unaccounted for element placed the aircraft outside every search zone that has ever been drawn. That third possibility is the one that no one in an official capacity wants to say out loud, because saying it out loud requires acknowledging that after 12 years and several $100 million and the full weight of 2 governments and multiple private search companies and the world's best satellite analysts and oceanographers, we may not even know what question we are trying to answer. We may be searching for the right object in the wrong place because something happened on that aircraft that none of the models have captured. The Northern Arc has a number. It is 32.5 degrees south, 96.8 degrees east. It is a coordinate that independent analyst Richard Godfrey published after running an analysis using a technique called WSPR, Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, which uses amateur radio transmissions to detect disturbances in the ionosphere, consistent with a large aircraft passing through. Godfrey's methodology is disputed. Several professional analysts have raised serious concerns about whether WSPR data has the resolution to track individual aircraft. But Godfrey's result, when placed on the map, sits north of the primary search zone, and it sits in an area consistent with both certain drift analyses and with a flight path that assumes a slower final descent than the official model predicts. The coordinate has not been searched at the resolution required to definitively exclude it. The search is over. That coordinate is still out there, unsearched to certainty, sitting in the dark water 4,000 meters down. And the institutions that could resolve it have decided to stop. Not because they are certain it contains nothing, because the funding has ended and the mandate has expired, and the ocean is very large and very expensive, and someone, somewhere, made a calculation that the cost of continuing outweighs the probability of finding what remains to be found. That calculation is real. It is not callous in the way that word sounds when applied to 239 missing people. It is the calculation that every search and rescue operation eventually faces. Resources are finite. Probability decreases. At some point, the expected value of another search campaign, denominated in dollars and ships and years, falls below the threshold that any institution is willing to fund unilaterally. Malaysia, China, and Australia, the 3 governments most directly involved, have reached that threshold. Ocean Infinity, which operates on a no-find, no-fee model and absorbs all operational costs in the expectation of a government reward upon finding the aircraft, has reached that threshold too. The economics of the search have collapsed, and when the economics collapse, the search stops, regardless of what remains unanswered. But I want you to sit with something specific about that calculation, because it contains a number that should disturb you. The reward that governments were offering Ocean Infinity for finding MH370 was in the range of $70 million. Ocean Infinity's operational costs for a campaign of that scale are believed to be in the same range. The margin between finding the plane and finding nothing is, for Ocean Infinity, the difference between profit and total loss. They searched twice at their own risk and found nothing twice. That is not a company that stopped casually. That is a company that has now absorbed significant losses in the pursuit of an answer that the ocean would not give. And they have decided, rationally and reasonably, that a third campaign without new evidence pointing to a specific, credibly different location would simply be a third loss. The 239 families are not an abstraction. I want to put specific weight on that sentence because it is easy, in a story this long and this technical, for the human reality of it to become wallpaper. There are families who have spent 12 years in a particular kind of limbo that has no clean word in English. They are not bereaved in the way that word normally works, because bereavement has a body, a funeral, a grave, a date. They are not living with a missing person in the way that phrase normally works, because the aircraft is almost certainly destroyed and the people on it are almost certainly dead. They are living in a third state for which the language is inadequate, a state where loss is certain, but proof is absent, where grief cannot complete its natural process because the object of the grief has never been formally confirmed to be gone. Psychologists who work with families of the missing describe this as ambiguous loss. The research on ambiguous loss describes it as one of the most psychologically damaging forms of grief, precisely because the brain cannot resolve it. The brain keeps a file open. The file demands new information. No new information comes. The file cannot be closed. 12 years of an unclosable file. And now the search is over and the file is still open, and the information that would close it is sitting somewhere in the dark water, and no one is going to look for it anymore. The Malaysian government's formal position is that the investigation remains open. Officially, MH370 has not been declared dead in the way that a single person missing persons case eventually gets declared. The families of the 239 passengers and crew retain the right to pursue legal remedies, to request the investigation be reopened, to petition for a new search if new evidence emerges. Those rights are real. But rights without resources are theoretical. The legal architecture exists. The institutional will does not. And the families know the difference. They have spent 12 years navigating the gap between those two things. And the end of the ocean infinity search has made that gap official. Now, I want to take you somewhere that the official investigation has never been willing to go directly. I want to take you to the question of what the cockpit voice recorder would contain if it were found tomorrow. Because that question is the center of everything. And the answer to it is the reason why finding the aircraft is not only a humanitarian imperative for 239 families. It is an evidentiary imperative for anyone who wants to understand what happened in that cockpit between 1:07 a.m. and the moment the plane crossed back over the Malay Peninsula and pointed itself at the southern Indian Ocean. The cockpit voice recorder on a Boeing 777 captures 2 hours of audio from 4 separate microphone channels: the captain's microphone, the co-pilot's microphone, a third observer position, and an area microphone mounted in the cockpit ceiling that captures ambient sound, the hum of systems, the rush of air, alarms, and anything said by anyone in the cockpit, regardless of whether they were using a push-to-talk. 2 hours. The flight lasted approximately 7 hours from the point of disappearance, which means the cockpit voice recorder, if recovered, would contain only the final 2 hours of audio. It would not contain the moment the ACARS was shut down. It would not contain the transponder shutdown. It would not contain the turn. All of that happened in the first hour of the disappearance, and the CVR records over itself in a continuous 2-hour loop. The first hour is gone, overwritten by the hours that followed. What the CVR would contain is everything from approximately 6:19 a.m. to 8:19 a.m., the final 2 hours of the flight, the hours during which, according to the satellite data, the aircraft was somewhere over the southern Indian Ocean, flying south, running on fuel that was almost exhausted. What would those 2 hours sound like? That depends entirely on who was in the cockpit and in what state. If the aircraft was on autopilot with the crew incapacitated, the audio would be quiet. System sounds, the hum of engines at cruise, possibly the sound of decompression if the cabin had been deliberately depressurized, possibly nothing dramatic at all until the fuel exhaustion, when the engines would have flamed out one after the other, and the aircraft would have begun its final descent in an eerie, engineless quiet. Nothing but wind noise and the passive creak of airframe. If a pilot was conscious and present, the audio would be different. There might be voices. There might be the sound of control inputs. There might be something said, alone in the cockpit over the southern Indian Ocean in the dark, that answers every question this story has raised. The CVR is the only witness that was present for all of it. It is sitting in a housing designed to survive an impact with the ocean and the subsequent years of deep water immersion. It is almost certainly still intact. It is almost certainly still holding whatever it holds, and no one is going to look for it anymore. And whatever it is holding, it is going to keep holding it in the dark, in the pressure and the cold, for as long as the ocean chooses to keep it. The flight data recorder is the other witness. It captures hundreds of parameters: control surface positions, engine performance data, altitude, speed, heading, the state of every system on the aircraft, every input made to the flight management computer, every deviation from the programmed flight path. The FDR would show definitively whether the aircraft's final descent was controlled or uncontrolled, steep or shallow, fast or gliding. It would show the state of the engines at fuel exhaustion. It would show whether any manual inputs were made in the final minutes. It would tell investigators with certainty what the aircraft was doing at the moment it hit the water. The FDR would not tell them who was doing it or why. That is the CVR's job. But together, the two recorders would close every technical question about the final flight of MH370. They would constrain the crash location. They would describe the impact. They would allow the debris drift models to be verified or corrected. They would give the families a cause. And they are both, almost certainly, within a few hundred meters of each other on the ocean floor somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, in water so deep and dark that the surface world might as well not exist. Here is the thing about the beacon. The underwater locator beacon attached to each black box is designed to emit a ping at 37.5 kilohertz once per second for 30 days after activation by water immersion. 30 days. The search ships didn't arrive in the southern Indian Ocean until more than a month after the disappearance. The beacons had almost certainly gone silent before the first hydrophone was in the water. The window in which the black boxes were actively advertising their location had closed before anyone was listening in the right ocean. That 30-day window and the time it took to redirect the search from the South China Sea, where MH370 was initially expected to have gone down, to the southern Indian Ocean, where the satellite data pointed, is one of the most painful timing failures in the entire investigation. A matter of weeks. If the satellite analysis had been completed faster, if the military radar data had been shared sooner, if the initial search had not been misdirected by the assumption that the aircraft had continued on its filed flight plan, the beacons might still have been pinging when the ships arrived. The black boxes might have been found in 2014. The answer might have been given to those families 10 years ago. Instead, the window closed, the pings stopped, and the ocean went silent. We are on rung 4 now. The cover-up, if that word applies, is not a government conspiracy in the cinematic sense. It is something quieter and more systemic, and in some ways more disturbing. It is the cover of institutional reluctance. The reluctance of the Malaysian government to release the military radar data in the first days after the disappearance, when it might have redirected the search. The reluctance of the investigation to formally name a cause when the evidence, while not conclusive, points in a direction. The reluctance of anyone in an official position to say what the simulator data suggests, what the sequential system shutdown suggests, what the deliberate routing through the surveillance gap suggests. The institutional reluctance to follow the evidence where it leads, because where it leads is toward a conclusion that has enormous legal, diplomatic, and reputational consequences for an airline, a government, and a family. That reluctance is not a conspiracy. It is a human response to an unbearable implication. But it has a cost, and the cost is paid by 239 families who have never been told what the evidence actually points to in plain language without qualification. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau, which led the primary search from 2014 to 2017, produced a final report that is a model of careful, technically rigorous, thoroughly hedged analysis. It is also a document that manages, across hundreds of pages, to avoid saying the thing that the evidence most directly implies. It discusses the possibility of deliberate action. It does not draw a conclusion. It discusses the simulator data. It does not integrate it into a finding. It presents the sequential system shutdowns. It does not name a cause. The report is technically honest and humanly evasive, and that combination is perhaps the most precise description of how official institutions respond when the truth they are investigating is one they are not constitutionally capable of stating. Let me take you to the final piece of evidence that has received the least attention relative to its significance. In the months after the disappearance, Boeing conducted an analysis of the flight management computer data that was available from the pre-disappearance portion of the flight. Specifically, they looked at the waypoints that had been programmed into the FMC before the aircraft took off. Standard practice. Pilots programmed the entire route into the computer before departure. The route to Beijing was there. What investigators have never been able to fully account for is whether any additional waypoints were programmed into the system after departure, during the flight, before the ACARS shut down. The FMC can be reprogrammed in flight. A pilot can enter new waypoints, new routes, a completely different destination, while the aircraft is airborne, without any external communication, without any record being transmitted. If someone reprogrammed the FMC after 1:07 a.m. and before the transponder shut down at 1:21 a.m., the evidence of the plane executing that new programming is locked inside the flight data recorder. On the ocean floor, unreachable. The question of whether the southward course was programmed into the computer or hand-flown by a pilot at the controls is one of the questions that only the FDR can answer. And the FDR is where it is. There is a community of independent investigators who have refused to accept the search's ending as the story's ending. Victor Ianello, Richard Godfrey, Don Thompson, Duncan Steele, Mike Exner. analysts with backgrounds in engineering, physics, oceanography, and aviation, who have spent years cross-checking the official analysis, identifying its assumptions, testing its margins of error, and publishing their findings openly. They disagree with each other on details. They agree on the fundamental problem. The search zone was derived from data that contains uncertainty, and the uncertainty has never been fully propagated through the analysis in a way that honestly represents how wide the candidate area actually is. They have identified a region north of the primary search zone, roughly between 30 and 33 degrees south, that they believe has not been searched to the standard required to definitively exclude the presence of the aircraft. That region is their remaining candidate. Ocean Infinity's 2024 to 2025 campaign covered portions of it, not all of it, not with the density that would produce the confidence level the analysts believe is required. The search ended before their candidate area was fully resolved. And they are still out there, these independent analysts, still running their models, still publishing their papers, still doing the work that the official investigation has now formally stopped doing, because they cannot accept that the answer is simply nowhere to be found. What would it take to resume the search? New evidence, specifically a new debris find with a well-constrained drift history that significantly narrows the entry point. A validated new analytical technique applied to the satellite data that produces a materially different arc position, or a technological development that dramatically reduces the cost of searching the remaining candidate area to the required resolution. The debris finds have slowed to almost nothing. The beaches of Eastern Africa and the Western Indian Ocean islands have given up most of what they are going to give. The satellite data has been analyzed by multiple independent teams, and the results cluster without converging to a point. The technology has advanced, but not to the degree that would make the remaining search economically trivial. The conditions for resumption are not impossible, but they are not close. And the families are being asked to wait for conditions that may not arrive in their lifetimes for an answer that the ocean may keep indefinitely. Now I need to bring you to the shadow loop. I have held it until now because I needed you to feel the full weight of everything else first. The satellite data, the debris, the simulator, the sequential shutdowns, the deliberate turn, the missing black boxes, the ended search. All of that had to sit in you before this final question could mean what it actually means. If the plane is not where the data says it should be, then where is it? That question has two possible answers, and both of them are disturbing in different ways. The first answer is that the plane is in the search zone, or near it, in a portion of the ocean floor that has not yet been imaged at sufficient resolution. The terrain at depth is complex. The sonar has blind spots, a wreckage field that is compact, sitting in a fold in the geology, oriented in the wrong direction relative to the sonar sweep, could be missed. Multiple analysts believe this is the most likely explanation. The plane is there. It is in the unsearched gaps. It has simply not been found yet because the ocean is hiding it in plain sight. The way the ocean hides everything through sheer indifferent scale. This answer is terrible, but it is clean. It means the search needs to continue. It means the answer exists and is findable. It means the families could still get closure if the money and the will could be found to keep looking. The second answer is harder. The second answer is that the satellite data, despite its elegance and its internal consistency and the enormous analytical effort invested in it, contains an error, not a fabrication, an honest error, a systematic bias in the BFO measurement, a misapplication of the methodology to a situation it was not designed for, a margin of uncertainty that was acknowledged but not fully incorporated into the search zone boundaries. If the BFO analysis contains a systematic error of a certain magnitude, the aircraft's final position could be materially different from the seventh arc. It could be north. It could be in shallower water. It could be in an area that has never been searched at all because the analysis said it was impossible. That answer is not a conspiracy theory. It is a legitimate scientific concern that has been raised by credentialed analysts in peer-reviewed contexts. And if it is true, then the search has been conducted in the wrong place, and the right place has never been looked at, and the plane has been sitting there for 12 years in undisturbed ocean, while search ships and autonomous vehicles swept thousands of kilometers away. There is a third answer that I am going to name, because to not name it would be to leave you with an incomplete picture, even though it is the answer that the available evidence does not support, and even though saying it out loud will cause some people to dismiss everything I have told you tonight. The third answer is that something happened to MH370 that has not been entered into any official or independent analysis because it involves information that has been deliberately withheld. Military assets, intelligence services, a surveillance architecture that saw more of MH370's final flight than has ever been acknowledged. The United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, China, all have military and intelligence assets in the Indian Ocean region that operate at a classification level that makes their data unavailable to civil aviation investigators. If any of those assets tracked MH370 beyond the point where the satellite data goes silent, if any radar or hydrophone or signals intelligence system saw something, the location of the aircraft might be known to someone, somewhere, at a classification level that a missing airliner investigation cannot reach. I'm not saying that is what happened. The evidence does not require it, but the architecture for it exists. And the architecture for it existing is itself a disturbing fact about the world that MH370 disappeared into. What the ending of the search means, stripped to its bones, is this. The most sophisticated search for a missing aircraft in the history of aviation has been formally concluded without finding the aircraft. The data that directed the search may contain an unresolved error. The physical evidence that washed ashore points to a location that does not perfectly align with the search zone. The black boxes are on the ocean floor in unknown water, holding the only definitive account of what happened, and no one is going to retrieve them. 239 people went into the southern Indian Ocean on the 8th of March, 2014, and the world has spent 12 years trying to find them and has been unable to. That failure is not for lack of effort. It is not for lack of technology. It is not for lack of money. Although the money eventually ran out, it is a failure that belongs to the ocean itself, to its scale and its depth and its indifference, and to the specific, terrible combination of circumstances that placed an aircraft in that ocean in a way that has defeated every attempt to locate it. The families gathered in Kuala Lumpur when the search conclusion was announced. They read their statements. They held photographs of the people they lost 12 years ago and have never been able to bury. They used words like devastated and abandoned and unacceptable. They said the search must continue. They said they would not stop advocating. They said their loved ones deserved to be found. All of that is true. All of that is right. And all of that is going to be met in the coming months and years by the institutional silence that follows. When the mandate expires and the funding stops and the ships go home and the autonomous vehicles are packed into their containers and the analysts move on to other cases and the world decides that MH370 has used its allocated share of the world's attention and the time has come to file it. That silence is not an ending. It is the shape that unsolved things take when the people responsible for solving them have decided to stop. There are 239 sets of remains somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean. They are in water so deep and so cold that decomposition has long since completed whatever it was going to complete. What is left of the physical evidence of 239 lives is distributed across a debris field that has never been located, resting on a floor that has been partially mapped and partially not, in a part of the world that is so remote that the concept of remoteness fails to capture it. And somewhere in that debris field, in a housing that has been protecting them for 12 years from pressure and cold and time, are two black boxes that know everything. They know what was said. They know what was done. They know who was in the cockpit and what that person intended and how it ended. They have been keeping that knowledge in the dark for 12 years, and they will keep it for as long as the ocean keeps them. The search is over. 12 years. Still nothing. And the question that was always underneath the search, the question that the search was always really trying to answer, the question of why, that question has not been searched for at all. It has been avoided. It has been hedged. It has been buried under technical language and institutional caution and the reasonable reluctance of official bodies to say what the evidence implies without the certainty that the evidence has not yet produced. The search for the plane is over. The search for the truth of what happened in that cockpit has never really begun. And until someone finds those black boxes, or until someone in a position of knowledge decides that the families of 239 people deserve the truth more than the institutions deserve protection from it, the shadow loop stays open. Where is it? That question is going to be there when you turn this off. It is going to be there tomorrow. It is going to be there when the next piece of debris washes up on a beach, somewhere on the rim of the Indian Ocean, grey and barnacled and salt-worn, and someone picks it up and takes a photograph and sends it to an analyst who runs the numbers and adds it to the dataset that no one is officially using anymore. The ocean is not finished with this story, even if the search is. The ocean gives things back on its own schedule, in its own time, for its own reasons. And somewhere out there, in water, the colour of nothing, 12 years deep, the answer is still waiting to be found.